the precious firstborn. In the early years of Makkah before the revelation, when the air was thick with idol worship and tribal pride, the house of a young merchant named Muhammad and his loyal wife Khadija stood apart. Their walls echoed not with ignorance but with gentleness, calm and compassion, and it was within those walls that the light of their first child Hazrat Zaynab was her name. The first flower in the garden of the Prophet's home, she opened her eyes into a world that did not yet know the burden and beauty her father would carry in the years ahead. Yet from the very beginning her presence brought warmth to every heart around her. Her father held her softly, his chest rising with emotion. Though he was not yet the messenger of Allah, he was already the embodiment of murky. Zaynab grew up under the shadow of Khadijah's strength and her father's grace. She was quiet but observant, always watching, always absorbing. Her mother's kindness to strangers, her father's fairness in trade, and their unshakable love for each other. In a city like Makkah, girls were often buried alive or ignored, but Zaynab was treasured, honored, and educated. Her father would often lift her into his arms, even as she grew older, whispering words of comfort and blessing. He would comb her hair with care, help her dress, and smile when she smiled. But childhood ends like the sunset, gentle but certain. As Zaynab entered her youth, her marriage became a topic of concern in Makkah. It was tradition. After all, her cousin Abul ibn Rabi came forward with a proposal. He was a good man by the standards of the day, honest, noble and skilled in trade, though he had not yet accepted the religion of Islam. Her parents saw in him potential and decency. With the Prophet's blessing, the marriage took place, and Zaynab moved to her new home. It was not far from her parents, but the bond between father and daughter was deep, and even the short distance made her heart ache. Abul loved her, and she loved him, and for a time they were happy. Then came the first tremble of thunder, the first drop of rain that would grow into a storm. Divine message descended upon her father. Now he was no longer just Muhammad the merchant, he was Muhammad the messenger of Allah, the chosen one, the bearer of truth, and the destroyer of idol. Zaynab believed instantly. Her heart was pure, and her soul understood. Abul did not. His love for her remained unshaken, but his mind resisted the call of Islam. He was not an enemy of it, but neither could he accept it at once. Years passed in this strange balance. Zaynab prayed in secret in her home-made dua quietly behind curtains while her husband remained on the edge, respectful but hesitant. Then war came. The Battle of Badr erupted between the Muslims of Medina and the Quraysh of Makkah. Abul went to fight not as an enemy of Islam, but as a man of loyalty to his tribe, and in that battle he was captured by the Muslims. When news reached Zaynab, she fell to her knees in grief and prayer. She knew her father led the Muslim army, yet she also knew her husband had not fought for hatred, but for family honor. She gathered all she had and searched for something precious, something that could move her father's heart. She found it, a necklace, the same one her mother Khadija had given her on her wedding night, the only piece of her mother left in her possession. With trembling hands she sent it to Medina as ransom for Abul, as hoping her father would understand. When the Prophet saw the necklace in the hands of the captors, his face changed color. He held it as if holding a memory, and tears filled his eyes. The companions around him grew silent. No one dared speak, for the Prophet was weeping. He turned to his companions and said, "If you agree, return his wife's necklace and release her husband." They all nodded without hesitation, and Abul was freed, but on one condition. He must send Zaynab to Medina for her protection, since she was a believer now, and Makkah was no longer safe for her. That night in Makkah, Zaynab waited at home, unaware of the promise her husband had made. Then, as dawn approached, Abul stood beside her. He held her hand gently and said, "I must send you to your father." Her eyes widened, but she did not argue. She understood the command of Allah and the necessity of separation, even when it broke her soul. With a heart heavy as stone, Abul arranged for her journey. He did not simply send her away, he personally escorted her out of Makkah, ensuring her safety on the dangerous road ahead. But the Quraysh heard of her escape and refused to let her go so easily. As They neared the edge of the city. A group of Quraysh men surrounded them. One of them struck Zaynab's camel with such force that she fell. Her body hit the hard desert ground, and the pain was unbearable. She was pregnant, and the trauma caused her to bleed internally. Abil-Az fought them off with all his strength, and finally managed to send her forward to Medina. Alone he returned to Makkah, wounded in spirit, while Zaynab reached Medina in pain and fear. Her father welcomed her with tears in his eyes. Her body weak, her soul shaken, but her faith stronger than ever. She was safe in the city of believers yet. She remained loyal in her dua for Abil, as her husband who still had not embraced Islam. Years passed. She raised her child alone in Medina. She missed her husband, prayed for him, longed for the day he would walk through the gates of Medina, not as a prisoner, not as a visitor, but as a Muslim. And one night the prayer was answered. A caravan came from Makkah, and among it was a bull, as again captured by the Muslims, again standing before the Prophet. But this time something changed. He was silent during the day, but before dawn he came to the Prophet's door. He knocked softly. The Prophet opened, and Abil-Az looked down, then said, "I bear witness there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." The Prophet smiled with such joy he immediately sent someone to inform Zaynab, and when she heard it, she cried not from sorrow, but from relief and gratitude. The years of separation, the pain of loss, the silent duas, it all led to this moment. Zaynab and Abil-Az were reunited at last, both as Muslims, both as believers, and for a short while happiness returned to her life. But Allah had written something else for her. Her body still bore the wounds from that brutal fall in Makkah years ago, and slowly, quietly, her health began to fade. The joy of reunion was brief, but beautiful. Her soul content, knowing her husband had joined the fold of Islam. She spent her final days in peace, surrounded by those who loved her. Her father, the Prophet, would visit her often, praying by her side, comforting her as only a father can. And one silent day, as the sun began to rise, Zaynab Bint Muhammad returned to her Lord. Prophet buried her with his own hands. He lowered her into the grave with tears streaming down his blessed face, his beloved firstborn gone, but her story forever remembered by those who love her and honor her name. Her life was filled with struggle, love, faith, separation, and reunion. Her name remains carved in the hearts of believers, not just as the daughter of the Prophet, but as a woman of strength, sacrifice, and unshakable belief. The wounds that never healed. The sun had risen over Medina, but the house of the Prophet remained quiet, its walls heavy with sorrow. The death of Zaynab had not only left an empty space in the home of the messenger, but a deep wound in his heart. No one knew how often he sat in silence, thinking of her, remembering her soft voice, her patience, and her unwavering love. As Zaynab had lived a life few could understand. She had walked through fire and never cried aloud. She had loved a man who for years did not share her faith, yet she remained loyal and patient. And when he finally came to Islam, she welcomed him without question, without bitterness. But her body had paid the price long before. Her soul gave out. The fall she suffered while trying to leave Makkah that day, so many years ago, had caused injuries no physician could see, but they left her bleeding internally, and the pain followed her for the rest of her life. She never told anyone how deeply it affected her. She never let her suffering be a burden on others, not even on her father. Prophet would often mention her in gatherings, his voice lowering as he spoke of her strength. His companions knew that when he looked down, lost in thought, it was often her memory that filled his mind. She had been his firstborn, the first to call him father, the first to run to him when he came home, the first to kiss his hands when he was tired. Now she was gone. After her death, Prophet ensured that her daughter Ummah would be raised with love and care. He would often carry the young girl on his shoulders during prayers, smiling even through the sadness he saw in her eyes, the reflection of Zaynab, her mother's kindness, her quiet nature, and her unspoken pain. But for Abil-Az the pain was even deeper. He had come to Medina, finally embracing the faith of his wife, but only to hold her hand as she lay dying. He had stayed with her those last days. He had whispered verses from the Quran beside her bed, and she had listened with closed eyes, smiling faintly when she died. He did not speak for a long time. He would walk the streets of Medina alone, sometimes pausing at the well where she once fetched water sometimes, standing outside the Prophet's house as if waiting for her to appear once more. Had lost more than a wife. He had lost the one person who waited for him, who believed in him, even when he had not believed in her. He regretted not accepting Islam earlier, not standing beside her when she needed him most, not raising their daughter together under the guidance of faith. The Prophet never blamed him. He never reminded him of the past. He only offered comfort, dignity, and silent understanding. As did not remarry, his heart was too full of memories of Zaynab. He lived quietly among the Muslims, always present, always respectful, but rarely speaking about the pain he carried. Sometimes the Prophet would see him sitting with Umama, braiding her hair, or telling her stories of her mother, and though tears would fill his eyes, he would smile, because in that moment, the legacy of Zaynab was still alive. The other daughters of the Prophet, Fatima, Ruqayya, and Kulthum, also mourned her loss. They had shared a bond no one else could understand. Each of them had seen their father mocked in the streets. Each had felt the pain of being a daughter of a prophet in a society that looked down on girls. But Zaynab had been the eldest, the one who held their hands when they were small, the one who gave them advice, the one who quietly endured every hardship without complaint. Prophet once said she was the most like Khadija in character, calm, kind, and full of patience, and for him losing her was like losing Khadija all over again. There were nights when he would wake from sleep, eyes damp with tears, and when asked what troubled him, he would simply whisper her name. Even the people of Medina remembered her gentle presence. She was never loud, never seen in crowds, but those who interacted with her remembered her for her soft voice, her honesty in trade, and her generosity to the poor. She never sought attention, yet her absence was deeply felt. One day, a companion asked the Prophet about the hardest moment in his life. Many expected him to mention Taif, where he was stoned, or Uhud, where he was wounded, but he looked down and said, "The day I buried my daughter with my own hands." There was a silence in the room, and no one spoke after that. Years passed and Islam continued to grow. Victories came, and the enemies of Islam slowly became its supporters, but in the Prophet's heart, the wound left by Zaynab remained fresh. When Umama grew older, she became very close to her grandfather. The Prophet would carry her even during congregational prayers and never showed irritation. When she clung to him, he would place her gently beside him when he bowed and lift her again when he stood. People would watch in awe, not understanding the depth of the love he had for her. She was not just a child, she was a living memory, a thread that connected him to his beloved Zaynab. When the Prophet fell ill in the final days of his life, he asked that Umama be brought to him. He looked at her with eyes that carried both love and farewell. He stroked her hair and said, "Take care of your faith, my child, and Allah will take care of you." And when the time came for the Prophet to leave this world, he whispered many names in his final hours: Khadija, Fatima, Zaynab. He called upon those who had shaped his journey, supported his mission, and filled his heart. After his death, Umama was raised by the family of Ali and Fatima. She grew into a woman of faith, strength, and beauty, just like her mother. And though the world had changed, though the Prophet was no longer there, his teachings lived on through the daughters he raised and the grandchildren who carried their legacy. As for Abal, as he lived the rest of his life in quiet remembrance of the woman who had waited for him, forgiven him, and prayed for his salvation, even when he had left her alone, he would sometimes visit her grave, sitting for hours in silence, no words spoken, just the soft rustle of wind through the palm trees of Medina. His beard grew white, his back bent with age, but his heart remained full of Zaynab's memory. People would ask him why he never remarried, why he never sought another companion. And he would simply smile and say, "I was already given the best." Her story, though often untold, remains one of the most moving examples of sacrifice, patience, and unwavering love in the history of Islam. She was not just the daughter of the Prophet. She was a believer, a wife, a mother, a woman who lived with quiet strength and died with silent dignity. And even though her life ended early, her legacy lives on in every heart that remembers her, in every prayer whispered in her name, and in every tear shed by those who hear her story, a daughter's faith amid fire. The son of Madinah rose every morning with purpose and faith, but for the Prophet of Allah, the light sometimes felt dim for each time he saw young Umama playing in the dust, chasing birds or holding the edge of his cloak. It reminded him of Zaynab, the daughter, whose life was like a candle flickering in a storm long. Before Zaynab had passed away, her life had already been woven with pain, the kind of pain that tests the soul, yet never breaks it. For her strength did not come from defiance, it came from submission, the kind that lets go of control and places full trust in the decree of Allah. She had married young not because she was forced, but because her heart was soft, and her father trusted the man who asked for her hand. Abulaz had shown kindness and honesty, two qualities her father valued above all else. But even in the beginning, Zaynab knew that true peace only lived in submission to one God. The day her father returned home from the cave of Hira, everything changed. His face was pale, his voice low, yet his eyes full of something she had never seen before, something heavy, yet divine. Her mother Khadija embraced and comforted him and believed in him without a second thought, and Zaynab followed the same path. She too believed, even before the message spread beyond their home. But when the Prophet began to call the people of Makkah toward Islam openly, Zaynab watched the world around her change quickly. Friends turned into enemies, voices rose in anger, streets filled with insults thrown not just at her father, but at all those who followed him, including her own sisters. Still, Zaynab remained steady. She prayed in secret. In her own home she covered her head when no one else did. She whispered verses of the Quran beneath her breath, while the people of Makkah mocked her family in the open market. And through it all, Abulaz remained kind to her, yet distant from the faith. He would see her wash her hands before prayer, bow her head in sujud, and place dates for the poor near the door, yet he did not join her. Instead, he watched her from afar, torn between love and tradition. Zaynab never forced him. She never argued. She never tried to prove anything. She only prayed each night under the stars, whispering to the one who sees all, that her husband would one day see the truth, not through pressure, but through love. Then came the darkest moment of her life, when the Prophet and his companions migrated to Medina, leaving behind their homes and possessions. Zaynab was not allowed to go with them. Abul as did not permit it, and Zaynab did not fight. She waited with patience, her eyes fixed on the horizon, hoping each day for a sign that would allow her to leave. But none came. She was the only daughter of the Prophet left behind in Makkah, and her heart was torn between obedience to her husband and longing for her father. Every day she heard reports of how her father was building a new community in Medina, one of equality, prayer, and mercy. Her heart rejoiced for him, but her arms remained empty, her eyes searching the skies for a path out of the city. When the Battle of Badr erupted, she waited in silence, not because she did not care, but because her heart was split. Her father was leading the Muslims, and her husband was among the Quraysh. When news came that her husband had been captured, she felt no joy, only fear. She sent the necklace her mother had given her, the only piece of Khadija left. With trembling hands and tear-filled eyes, she asked for mercy from the one man who always gave it, her father. When her father received the necklace, he held it as if he were holding Khadija again, and his heart broke in silence. He did not speak for a long time, and when he did, his voice shook. He asked his companions if they would release her husband, and they all agreed, for the Prophet did not want his daughter to suffer one more day. But what followed broke her spirit more than anything. Abulaz agreed to release her and send her to Medina, but as she left the city, they were attacked by Quraysh men who refused to let her go. One of them struck her camel, and she fell to the ground. The pain was not only physical, it was a wound that would bleed quietly for the rest of her life. She lost her child shortly after, and though she never spoke of it, her eyes told the story. Her smiles dimmed, her voice softened, her steps slowed. When she finally reached Medina, her father wept as he embraced her, but even he did not know the full pain she carried, for she never let it show. She resumed her life with dignity, helping the early Muslim women in Medina teaching the Quran, tending to the poor, and raising her young daughter Umama alone while her husband remained in Makkah. The years passed, and though the Prophet married again after Khadija, he would often speak of Zaynab and her mother together as one soul. He would say that Zaynab had the patience of Khadija, the loyalty of Khadija, and the silent strength that made both of them unforgettable. Believers loved her not because she sought praise, but because she gave without asking in return. Then, one night Abu Az appeared in Medina, not as a traveler, not as a soldier, but as a refugee. He sought the protection of Zaynab once again, and she gave it without question. She stood before the Prophet in the mosque and said, "I have given him my protection," and the Prophet accepted it, for he honored his daughter's heart even when the laws had not yet been revealed. Later, Abayl as accepted Islam, and the hearts that had been separated by faith were reunited not just in love, but in belief. Reunion was brief but meaningful. She smiled again, laughed again, even if just for a little while, but her body could no longer carry the weight of years. Her illness returned slowly at first, and then fiercely she weakened day by day, the pain returning where it had first begun, and though she tried to hide it, the Prophet could see it in her face. He would visit her, often holding her hand, praying by her side, telling her stories of paradise, of gardens, rivers, and peace. He would speak of Khadija and the reunion awaiting them, and Zaynab would nod slowly, her eyes closing, as if imagining it all. And then the day came when her eyes closed one final time, her body still, her soul free. The Prophet led her funeral himself, his voice steady but his eyes full of tears. He placed her into the ground with his own hands and stood in silence as the dust covered her once shining face. Turned to the companions and said, "Be gentle with her, for she was broken in this world, but her reward is with her Lord." And from that day he never forgot her. Every time he saw Umama, he smiled. Every time he heard someone speak of Makkah, he paused and remembered her laughter, her prayers, and her pain. Zaynab Bint Muhammad was not a warrior with a sword nor a speaker on the pulpit. She was a daughter who bore the weight of love, faith, and sacrifice with dignity and silence. Her story is not just a tale of the past, it is a mirror for every woman who loves with patience, who prays in secret, and who bears pain with grace. She was a rose in the desert, a light in the storm, and her name will forever be among the noble women of Islam. Her legacy lives forever. The city of Medina continued to grow under the light of revelation, its streets echoing with the call to prayer, its hearts bound together through faith. But even in such a blessed city, pain still lingered, especially in the heart of the Prophet who had buried his beloved daughter Zaynab with his own hands. The Prophet who had buried his beloved daughter Zaynab with his own hand. Prophet never spoke much of his sorrow, yet everyone could see it in his eyes every time he looked at her daughter Umama, who now lived in his care. He never passed her by without a smile or a hand on her head, because she was not just his granddaughter, she was the final thread that kept Zaynab close to him. The Prophet once held Umama during prayer, placing her gently on the ground as he bowed and lifting her again when he stood. The companions watched quietly, understanding that this simple act carried within it the weight of love and loss. Though Zaynab was no longer with them, her presence was everywhere in Medina, in the kindness her daughter showed, in the softness of her voice, in the way she served others without asking for thanks. The women of Medina remembered her with affection. They told stories of how she would walk barefoot to bring bread to the poor, how she would sit with elderly women, listening patiently to their worries, how she would recite the words of Allah late into the night, her voice trembling not from fear but from awe. Her strength had never been in loudness. Her courage was not in defiance, it was in her ability to hold on to faith even when everything around her crumbled. Her life had been marked by separation, loss, and pain, but she never complained, never questioned, never turned away from her Lord. The Prophet once said, "The best of women are Maryam, daughter of Imran, Khadija bint Khuwaylid, Fatima bint Muhammad, and Asia, wife of Pharaoh." Many believe in their greatness, and rightfully so, yet Zaynab too lived with the same strength, the same trust in Allah, the same sacrifice. She waited for her husband when his heart was closed. She welcomed him when it opened. She raised her child alone. She endured the fall from her camel. She suffered the loss of her baby in silence, and still she smiled. Still she gave. Still she served. It was not just the companions who remembered her, it was also the angels, for when the prophet buried her, he lifted his eyes to the sky and whispered her name in his prayer. And the skies heard, and the records were written, and her place in Jannah was promised after her passing. Her story traveled quietly through generations. Mothers told it to their daughters. Scholars shared it in their circles. Poets wrote verses of her patience, and lovers of the prophet wept when they heard her name. But her story was never told for attention. It was never written in books for fame. Her story was preserved by hearts, touched by her example, by souls who found in her life a mirror of their own silent battles. She taught the world that you can suffer and still be righteous, that you can love and still let go, that you can live a short life, yet leave behind an everlasting light. Abul, as never remarried, he lived each day in Madna, remembering her in his prayers, remembering her in the eyes of a mama. He would visit her grave, often not with flowers, not with loud mourning, but with silence, with reflection, and with prayers. He would sit by the grave and whisper verses of the Quran, his voice low, his heart full, and sometimes tears would fall, not just for what was lost, but for what had been gained through her faith. He once told a companion, "I did not accept Islam because of pressure. I accepted it because of her prayers, because of her patience. She was the reason I found truth, and I will carry her love until I return to my Lord." As for Ummah, she grew into a woman of beauty and piety, her character a reflection of her mother. She would serve in the Prophet's household with gentleness. She would speak with respect, and she would always lower her gaze after the Prophet's passing. Ummah was married to Ali ibn Abi Talib after the death of Fatima, and she lived a quiet life, always remembering her grandfather, always upholding the dignity her mother taught her. She never became a public figure, never sought position. But the legacy of her mother flowed through her actions, in every act of charity, in every word of truth she carried her mother's spirit forward. The Prophet once said that the believers are like one body. When one part hurts, the entire body feels it. And though the Ummah moved forward, building cities, spreading Islam, recording Hadith, the heart of the Prophet still beat in every soul that remembered Zaynab Bint. So her story remains alive, not on the tongues of the loud, not in the pages of history books covered in dust, but in the tears of those who read about her and feel something move inside them, in the hearts of daughters who pray in secret for their struggling husbands, and the strength of women who suffer in silence, yet never lose their faith. Zaynab Bint Muhammad was not just the daughter of the Prophet. She was a teacher of sabr, a guide for the grieving, a light for the lost. She showed the world that you can be soft and strong at once, that love does not need noise to be real, and that pain carried with faith becomes a path to paradise. Her name should be spoken with love, her story told with care, her life remembered with honor. And when the believers raise their hands in prayer, asking for ease, for strength, for patience, let them also remember her and say, "May Allah be pleased with Zaynab, the flower that bloomed in the desert, the daughter who believed, the wife who waited, the mother who loved, and the soul who returned to her Lord with a heart full of light."